The Shadow Syndicate, a Jackson adventure by Sanford Bernberg. Chapter 1, The Call. Jackson had settled into the quiet rhythm of anonymity. It was a demanding life, a constant dance of vigilance and self-erasure, but it was his. He operated in the shadows, a ghost in the vast, interconnected network of galactic commerce, taking on jobs that righted small wrongs without ever leaving a trace. He was off-grid, a forgotten number in a forgotten system, and he liked it that way. The peace was a rare commodity. The encrypted message cut through the stillness. It didn't come through a comms channel or a public network. It materialized as a single, untraceable data packet on a secondary, deep kernel console he reserved for emergencies. Jackson's muscles tensed, a primal reaction to the sudden intrusion. He'd built his life around a singular purpose, to avoid being found. He watched the data packet flicker for a moment before an old, familiar logo began to render. OmniCorp. Jackson felt a cold spike of rage. He didn't open the message right away. He ran a dozen diagnostic scans, a dozen decryption algorithms, and a dozen security checks. Nothing. The packet was clean, a ghost in itself. The message was a simple text string, a single phrase: "My daughter is gone. I need your help. A9. A9. Jackson remembered the designation. The former senior vice president of OmniCorp's Special Projects Division. A man who, while not directly tied to the conspiracy, was a key cog in the machine that had nearly ended Jackson's life and framed him as a terrorist. Jackson's first instinct was to delete the message and forget it ever existed. But then he thought of the man's desperation. The man had no credible way to contact him, no reason to risk a direct plea for help unless something was truly wrong. Jackson's moral code was a complex and unyielding thing. It was forged in the fire of countless battles and the silent solitude of the wild. He knew what it was like to be helpless, and he knew what it was like to be a victim of a system with no recourse. The executive's offer was for money, but the man's plea was for help, and Jackson's code demanded he at least hear him out. The rendezvous was arranged with a series of dead drop messages, each more convoluted than the last, a paranoid dance of a man who knew he was being watched. The final coordinates placed the meeting on an abandoned fuel depot, a derelict station orbiting a desolate asteroid in a remote sector. Jackson arrived in a small, nondescript shuttle, landing on the station's rusted hull. He was armed, alert, and on full sensory lockdown. He found the executive in a dusty, dimly lit control room. The man who had once commanded a fleet of starships and a legion of researchers was now a hollow shell. He wore a simple jumpsuit, his once pristine hair now thin and unkempt. His eyes, full of a defeated weariness, lit up with a flicker of hope when he saw Jackson enter. The executive, without preamble, launched into his story. "My daughter, Amelia. She was taken 3 days ago," he said, his voice cracking. "I tried to go to the authorities. They laughed at me. My name. It means nothing now. A disgraced man from a disgraced company. They think I staged it for a ransom or to get attention." He presented Jackson with a flimsy data packet on a secure tablet. "They call themselves pirates. They said they would contact me, but they haven't. I don't know what to do. The only thing I have left is a small savings I was able to keep from being seized in the OmniCorp fiasco, and I'll give it all to you if you can bring her back. Please." Jackson looked from the man's pleading eyes to the sparse data packet. It contained a few comms logs from a burner network, some fuzzy images of the supposed pirate vessel, and a tracking beacon that had gone dark an hour after the abduction. The information was next to useless, a few digital breadcrumbs in a galaxy of stars. Jackson's instinct screamed that this wasn't a simple kidnapping. Pirates weren't usually this precise, this clean. They didn't take people for no reason. "No payment," Jackson said, his voice a low rumble. The executive's face fell. "I'll do it on my terms. I need all the intel you have. No interference. Nothing. You give me everything you know, and you let me work." The man nodded, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. He quickly handed over another secure drive with a few more files, more of the same flimsy information. Jackson took it, a plan already beginning to form in his mind. The information was too thin. He knew a simple rescue mission would turn into a trap. He needed a brilliant mind, someone with the skills to dive into the deep web, someone with the expertise to uncover the truth behind the digital breadcrumbs. He needed Elias. The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 2, The Proposition. Jackson's small shuttle was a single, silent tear in the blackness, leaving the derelict fuel depot far behind. The secure drive from the former executive felt cold and insubstantial in his hand, a physical manifestation of the hollow desperation of a man who had nothing left. The information was worthless for a physical hunt, but it was enough to get the attention of the only person he trusted with a problem this complex. He bypassed the shuttle's main comms and fired up a hidden, quantum-encrypted terminal he had installed himself. It was a dark net of their own creation, a series of quantum-entangled comms buoys that made it impossible to trace. Jackson sent a single, coded burst. A minute later, a response flickered on the screen. "You're an expensive ghost to contact, my friend," the text read. "Last I checked, you were still running from the people you saved." "Elias," Jackson typed back. "I've found trouble." A long pause followed, the kind of silence that held a universe of unspoken questions. Elias was his intellectual counterpart, a man who lived entirely in the digital world. He was a master of systems, a brilliant anarchist who believed that all data should be free, and all secrets exposed. He was the reason Jackson had survived the last conspiracy. "Lay it on me, big man. I'm guessing it's not an orbital traffic violation." Jackson uploaded the paltry data packet. "A desperate father. Daughter kidnapped by pirates. The father is A9. The reply was instantaneous and laced with digital laughter. "You're kidding. You're working for an OmniCorp executive? The very people who tried to put a bullet in your head?" "No payment," Jackson typed. "Moral code. Something's wrong with the data. Not a typical snatch and grab. The comms logs. They're too clean. No ransom demands. No boasting. It feels like a bad fabrication." Another, longer silence. Jackson knew Elias was already working, his mind a whirlwind of algorithms and data patterns. He would be dissecting the flimsy logs, tracing the ghost images, and searching for the digital fingerprints that the average pirate would leave behind. "You're right," Elias's reply came, the tone now serious. "This isn't a kidnapping. It's a recruitment operation. These aren't pirates. I'm seeing some highly sophisticated encryption protocols I haven't seen in years. Not since the early days of corporate espionage. The kind of tech only a government could afford. Give me a few minutes." Jackson sat back in his seat, the hum of the ship his only companion. The stars outside were a silent, indifferent audience. A minute stretched into 5, then 10. When Elias finally replied, his words were grim. "They're not pirates, Jax. They're a clandestine arm of a fringe government agency known as the Shadow Syndicate. They're not looking for money. They're after something far more valuable, your former client's knowledge. They're trying to force him to turn over OmniCorp's assets, to use his connections and expertise to make them the new dominant power. The fall of OmniCorp left a power vacuum, and they're moving in to fill it." "Their base?" Jackson typed. "They're ghosts, Jax. They've been operating in the deep sectors for years. But they made a mistake. They used a comms frequency they thought was secure, one that was just barely caught by an old surveillance node of mine. I've triangulated a possible location. An asteroid mining facility, about 5 days out. It's fortified, but it's not impregnable. It's a trap, Jackson. They want you to come to them." Jackson looked at the coordinates on his screen. A cold smile spread across his face. "Good. We'll give them exactly what they want." The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 3, Unveiling the Truth. Elias's digital presence was a whirlwind of activity. From his secure, off-grid terminal, he was a ghost in the machine, a relentless force of data mining. Jackson could almost feel the energy of his friend, a silent hum across the quantum-encrypted connection. He knew Elias was going a dozen levels deeper than a simple keyword search, peeling back layers of the digital world that most people didn't even know existed. Jackson spent the time in a state of quiet focus, a mental exercise he'd honed over years in the field. He ran through a series of tactical scenarios in his head, mapping out the possible layout of an asteroid mining facility. He considered angles of approach, potential entry points, and likely security measures. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he would be ready for anything. "They're good," Elias's message finally buzzed on the screen. The text was clipped, urgent. "I'm hitting walls, hard. This isn't a standard encryption protocol. It's custom, a mix of old corporate firewalls and something new and nasty. I've seen traces of it before, but never this well implemented." Jackson's brow furrowed. "The government? Worse. They're a splinter faction, a paramilitary wing of an organization that's a ghost itself. They've been operating in the deep sectors for years, taking out smaller mining operations and corporate research labs. They don't want money. They're after intellectual property, advanced tech, and tactical information." Elias sent over a new data packet. "I've cross-referenced the comms signature with every known and unknown source. The original message came from a ghost beacon, a disposable comms node planted near the executive's home. The signal was a ghost of a ghost. But I found a flaw in their protocol. They used a low-frequency broadcast to a backup relay. The broadcast lasted less than a second, but it was enough. A new set of coordinates appeared on the screen, along with a schematic of a fortified asteroid. That's the base. It's an old mining facility. They've retrofitted it with state-of-the-art defenses, and the comms array is on a frequency so obscure it's practically a dead zone. The pirates were just a smokescreen. This is a highly organized, highly funded group with a long-term goal. And the girl? Jackson typed. She's there. The logs confirm it. They're not hurting her. She's their leverage. They want the executive to hand over his knowledge of OmniCorp's hidden assets, the ones he kept to himself. They're positioning themselves to take over where OmniCorp left off. This isn't a rescue mission, Jax. It's an infiltration and a direct confrontation with a group that wants to be the new dominant power. Jackson looked at the schematic, the details of the asteroid's defense grid already burning into his mind. He knew this was a trap. They were waiting for him. They had his moral code, his desire to do the right thing, and they were using it as bait. I'm on my way, he typed, the words a silent promise. The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 4, Reconnection. The journey to the asteroid mining facility was a 5-day blur of silence and isolation. Jackson spent the time in a state of quiet meditation, preparing his mind and body for the ordeal ahead. He wasn't just a ghost running from a past he couldn't escape, he was returning to a version of himself he had tried to leave behind. He was reconnecting with the instincts that had kept him alive through 2 wars and 1,000 clandestine operations. His thoughts drifted back to the forests of his youth. To the Boy Scouts, where his father, a stern but patient man, had taught him to read the land. He wasn't tracking soldiers then, but deer and rabbits, learning to move silently, to find the blind spots in nature's defenses. He remembered a specific exercise, navigating a dense, 300-acre wood with only a compass and a map, finding his way through without ever making a sound. It was the genesis of his career, a foundation of patience and observation that was more valuable than any weapon. That foundational training was later refined in the Special Forces. They called it ghosting, the art of entering a hostile area, accomplishing a mission, and leaving without a trace. He learned to read a landscape not for animal tracks, but for patrol patterns, security cameras, and the subtle energy signatures of automated defenses. He learned to use the shadows, to use the terrain itself as an ally. As his ship drifted silently into the asteroid's shadow, Jackson's mind clicked into a familiar rhythm. The asteroid, a pockmarked, oblong rock, was an ancient mining site, but the schematic Elias had provided showed new life. It was a fortress. Turrets, sensor arrays, and shielded docking bays dotted the surface, a prickly shell protecting something inside. Jackson killed the engines and let the ship drift on its own momentum. He was a piece of space debris now, just another rock among a billion others. He used his onboard sensors to conduct a low-frequency sweep. Elias was right. The comms array was a masterpiece of misdirection, a ghost frequency that made it invisible to all but the most specialized scanners. Jackson found it, and a grim smile touched his lips. He knew he was in the right place. He spent the next few hours circling the asteroid, a slow, methodical orbit. He was looking for a flaw, a weakness in the system. The turrets were automated, with a predictable firing arc. The sensor arrays were powerful, but they had a blind spot, a small, triangular area where 2 fields of vision overlapped and created a microsecond gap in coverage. A drone could pass through, but a man would have to move with the impossible speed he had honed over a lifetime. He found it, an old, decommissioned ore chute on the far side of the asteroid, away from the primary docking bays. The schematic showed it had been sealed with a thick blast ore, but Jackson noticed a subtle thermal irregularity. It was a recent weld, a patch job. The door was a weak point, possibly installed in a hurry and not as secure as the others. He had his entry point. He brought the shuttle in for a final approach, a silent, gliding shadow. Jackson was home. Not in the warmth of a bed or the comfort of a home, but in the cold, dangerous thrill of a world he was born to navigate. He was a ghost on the hunt, and the reconnection was complete. The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 5, Unraveling the Truth. Jackson's entry was a textbook exercise in controlled chaos. He piloted the shuttle to the blind spot he'd identified, the old ore chute door, a dark scar on the asteroid's surface. He deployed a dampening field to eliminate energy, sound and vibration signatures. Then with a precise, almost surgical blast from a compact thermite charge, he vaporized the faulty weld. The door hissed open, a low, metallic groan lost to the vacuum of space, revealing a narrow service tunnel filled with the stale air of a long-dead facility. He sealed the shuttle's airlock and slipped inside, the familiar thud of gravity boots on a foreign deck a stark reminder that he was no longer an invisible ghost. He was an invader. But the training, the years of honed instinct, took over. He was a predator in the dark. The ducts were a labyrinth of twisting metal and low ceilings, the kind of space designed for droids and maintenance crews, not for a man of his size. But he moved with a fluid grace that belied his massive frame, each movement economical and silent. He avoided patrols by listening to the faint vibrations in the metal walls, anticipating their movements before he saw them. He passed cameras by covering the lenses with a small, adhesive patch, his fingers moving with a magician's sleight of hand. He was a shadow, a whisper in the machine. After hours of silent movement, he found what he was looking for, a secure holding area, far from the main living quarters. He peered through a ventilation grate and saw her. A young woman, no more than 20, sat in a Spartan room, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. The executive's daughter. She was physically unharmed, but Jackson saw the subtle signs of emotional torment. This wasn't a standard kidnapping, it was a psychological operation. He moved silently to the door, a heavy blast door with a digital keypad. As he worked on it, his hand palmed a comms device and with a single, coded burst, he sent a signal to Elias. Found her. There's something more going on. He bypassed the lock with a simple, elegant piece of code. The door slid open, but a proximity sensor triggered a silent alarm. It was an old model, not a new one. Another mistake by his captors. He moved quickly, a blur of motion, slipping into a nearby maintenance closet as a patrol came down the hallway. He watched through the crack of the door, seeing the guards' confusion as they checked the empty hallway. He waited for them to move on, his mind already racing. This wasn't just a fortified asteroid. This was a complex, multi-layered operation designed to confuse and mislead. They didn't want the girl to escape, they wanted to show her to her father. They wanted to break him, to force his compliance. The pirates were a diversion, and the kidnapping was a front. The real prize was the executive's knowledge. He found it moments later. A small, secure data core mounted to a server rack. It wasn't a standard storage unit, it was a live feed of the facility's internal communications. He jacked in, and a torrent of data flooded his wrist console. He wasn't just downloading information, he was watching a live, encrypted feed of the Syndicate's operations. He sent the data to Elias, a massive torrent of information he knew would take a digital genius to untangle. Got it. This goes way deeper than we thought. They're not just a splinter group. Elias's reply came moments later, a flurry of data and a single, chilling line of text. They're not. They're building a new world order. They're planning to exploit the OmniCorp power vacuum with targeted attacks on global financial and infrastructure hubs. They are going to use the executive's knowledge to do it. Jackson felt a knot of cold dread twist in his stomach. He wasn't just here to rescue a girl. He was here to stop a new, and far more dangerous, conspiracy. The Shadow Syndicate was a cancer spreading in the galaxy, and he had just found himself at the epicenter. The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 6, The Hunt Begins. With the chilling truth of the Shadow Syndicate's plan now laid bare, Jackson's objective shifted. This was no longer a simple rescue mission, it was a race to destabilize a new galactic threat. The girl, the executive's daughter, was now a secondary objective. The primary goal was to cripple the Syndicate's command structure and communications, to blind and deafen the enemy before they could realize their plan was compromised. Jackson slipped out of the maintenance closet and into the main corridor. The patrols were still operating on a predictable loop, their movements sluggish and their situational awareness low. They had no idea they had a ghost in their machine, a man who could turn their meticulously planned operation into a chaotic mess. He started with the security hubs. These were small, fortified rooms where the security consoles for each sector were located. He moved with a dancer's grace, silently taking down the guards with a quick, efficient flick of his wrist. His years in special forces had taught him how to disable a man without a sound, how to leave no trace of a struggle. He disabled each console, severing the connection to the main security grid. He wasn't just a ghost, he was a surgeon, cutting the nerves of his enemy. Next, he targeted the command center. This was the heart of the operation, the one place where he expected to meet resistance. The schematic Elias had provided showed a heavy blast door, a half-dozen guards, and a small command team. Jackson moved to the entry point, a service vent that led directly to the command center's ceiling. He cut a hole in the vent with a tiny, high-frequency laser, the sound absorbed by a silencing field on the device. He lowered himself into the room, a silent predator dropping from the shadows. The guards were startled, but they were too slow. Jackson was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of fists and feet. He moved with impossible speed, each strike precise and devastating. In a matter of seconds, all 6 guards were unconscious, their weapons clattering to the floor. The command team, frozen in their chairs, stared at the hulking figure in a mix of fear and disbelief. Jackson walked past the command team and to the comms array. With a single, brutal yank, he ripped the main power cable from the console. Sparks flew, a few small explosions rippled across the console, and the room was plunged into a sudden, deep silence. The Syndicate was now deaf. He then moved back to the control panel, his fingers flying across the keypad. He was a master of infiltration, but he was also a master of data manipulation. He uploaded a small, elegant virus, a tiny worm that would burrow into the system and corrupt their schematics, their plans, and their data. The Syndicate was now blind as well. Jackson looked back at the command team. Their expressions were a mix of rage and terror. They had been in control, and now they were at his mercy. "This is a warning," he said, his voice a low growl. "You've awakened something you can't put back to sleep." He moved back into the ventilation shaft, a phantom returning to the shadows. He had done his job. He had neutralized the threat. Now it was time to get the girl and get out of there. But he knew, in his gut, that this was just the beginning of the hunt. The Shadow Syndicate would not take this defeat lightly. They were the kind of enemy that never forgot, and they never forgave. The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 7, The Confrontation. Jackson moved with a renewed sense of purpose, a laser focus on his final objective. He was no longer a ghost, he was a storm, and he was heading directly for the eye of the hurricane. He moved silently through the facility's quiet corridors, using the blueprints Elias had provided to navigate a direct path to the secure holding area. He was a force of nature, a freight train of a man with one purpose: get the girl and get out. The corridor outside the holding area was a wide, open space. No vents, no hiding spots. It was a kill box, designed to funnel any attacker directly into the open. Jackson knew this. He also knew that his opponent, the Syndicate leader, would be waiting for him. He rounded the final corner and stopped. There they were, 3 armed guards, their rifles raised and pointed at the door, and in front of them, a man in a crisp uniform. He was older, with a lean, ascetic face and a glint of cold amusement in his eyes. This was the leader. The leader smiled, a thin, humorless curl of his lips. "I knew you'd come. The ghost who can't leave things alone. But this is the end of the line for you." Jackson stood his ground, his arms at his sides, his body a coiled spring of controlled power. "Let her go. This isn't your fight." "On the contrary," the leader said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "This is exactly my fight. You ruined our last play, and now you've come here, to my home, to do it again. But you won't." He gestured to his guards. "Kill him." The guards opened fire, but Jackson was already in motion. He was no longer a man, he was a blur, a whirlwind of fists and feet. He moved with impossible speed, ducking and weaving through the hail of plasma fire, the red bolts scorching the walls around him. He took down the first guard with a single, brutal kick to the chest that sent him flying back, his rifle clattering to the floor. The second guard was on him, but Jackson caught his rifle and snapped it in two with a single, powerful motion. He finished him with a quick, precise blow to the head. The third guard was startled, but the Syndicate leader was not. He had seen Jackson's legendary skills in the encrypted files. He smiled, pulling a sleek pistol from his holster. "You're good. But you're not a god." Jackson lunged, but the leader was quick. He fired 3 shots, each one aimed at Jackson's head, and Jackson caught 2 of them in a move that seemed impossible, the third glancing off the side of his skull, leaving a faint, smoking burn mark. Jackson was on him now, a hulking shadow. He moved to disarm the leader, but the man was faster than he looked. He parried Jackson's attack and managed to get a knife from his belt. Jackson dodged the strike and drove his fist into the leader's gut, knocking the wind out of him. The leader gasped and Jackson disarmed him, smashing the pistol against the leader's hand. He then lifted the man in the air and slammed him against the wall. The leader gasped in shock. The leader slumped to the ground, his eyes wide with a mix of pain and terror. He had underestimated the legend. Jackson moved to the blast door, which slid open to reveal a terrified young woman. She was cowering in the corner, her eyes wide. Jackson knelt and offered his hand. "Come on. We're leaving." She hesitated for a second and then took his hand, her small fingers trembling as they closed around his. They moved quickly down the corridor, the silence broken only by the sound of their running feet. Jackson led the way, his body a shield, his mind racing. He could hear the alarms blaring in the distance, a low, pulsing siren that echoed through the asteroid's winding halls. The hunt was over, and now the escape began. They reached the hangar bay, and Jackson slammed the button to open the blast doors. The hangar was empty, save for his small shuttle. It was a clean getaway. They ran to the ship, the door sliding open with a low hiss. He pushed the girl inside, and as she scrambled to her seat, He glanced back at the hangar doors. They were closing, but he saw figures rushing towards them. He jumped into the pilot's seat and fired up the engines. The shuttle lurched forward, an explosion of light and sound. He yanked the throttle back, and the ship shot forward, a fiery comet leaving the hangar just as the blast doors slammed shut. He heard a thud and a screech as one of the figures crashed into the door. He looked down at the young woman in the seat next to him. She was breathing heavily, but she was safe. He set the course for Earth, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He had done his job. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the Shadow Syndicate would not take this defeat lightly. The hunt was over, but the game had just begun. The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 8, The Escape. The shuttle's thrusters roared to life, a sudden, violent shove that pinned Jackson and the young woman against their seats. The hangar blast doors slammed shut behind them just as the first of the pursuing Syndicate craft erupted from a nearby bay. Plasma fire lanced through the vacuum, sizzling harmlessly against the door's reinforced alloy. "Hold on," Jackson's voice was a low rumble, his hands flying across the controls with an effortless grace that betrayed his massive frame. He was a natural pilot, his instincts honed by years of flying everything from rust bucket transports to high-tech covert ops ships. He wasn't just flying, he was a dancer in the void, weaving through the asteroid debris field with precision and speed. The Syndicate ships were a pair of sleek, predatory fighters, faster and more heavily armed than his shuttle. They were designed for the hunt, their sensors locking onto his heat signature. He knew a straight-line flight was a death sentence. "Strap in tight," Jackson instructed, his eyes fixed on the display. He yanked the throttle, and the shuttle spiraled into a tight, corkscrewing turn, using a massive, slow-drifting asteroid as cover. Plasma bolts seared the rock behind them, chunks of ice and stone vaporizing in brilliant flashes. The girl beside him, whose name he still didn't know, was a silent study in terror. She had a death grip on the armrests, her knuckles white. He glanced at her for a moment, a fleeting flash of compassion in his stern gaze. This was a nightmare for her, and he was the monster who had brought it to a head. "Almost there," Jackson muttered, more to himself than to her. He had a plan, a reckless, almost suicidal one. He was leading the Syndicate fighters into a dense field of micrometeoroids, a natural debris cloud that would tear apart ships not designed for such an environment. The Syndicate ships, built for open space dogfights, would be a liability. The fighters followed him, their pilots arrogant and overconfident. They were so focused on the kill, they didn't see the danger until it was too late. He plunged the shuttle into the cloud, the micro-impacts creating a low hum against the hull. The fighters, however, were not so lucky. The micrometeoroids became a hailstorm of tiny, kinetic bullets, pockmarking their hulls and disabling their systems. One of the fighters spun out of control, its engine blowing out in a spectacular explosion of fire and shrapnel. The other, damaged and disoriented, veered off, its pilot wisely deciding to cut his losses. Jackson emerged from the other side of the cloud, his shuttle bruised but intact. He set a course for the rendezvous point, a neutral, uninhabited moon in a nearby system. The immediate threat was gone. He finally turned to the young woman. "We're safe. For now." She released her grip on the armrests, her body trembling with a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief. Tears streamed down her face. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a raw whisper. "Jackson," he said simply. "And you?" "Lila," she responded, her voice a little stronger. "Why did you save me?" He considered his answer. It wasn't for the money, or the man who had hired him. It wasn't even for Elias, who had provided the intel. It was for something deeper, something he had lost and found again in the chaos of his life. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said, and for the first time in a long time, he believed it. He knew the Shadow Syndicate would not rest. They would be hunting him, and Elias, and anyone else who stood in their way. He had done his job, but now he was caught up in a new war, a conflict he could not walk away from. The game had just begun. The Shadow Syndicate, Chapter 9, The Resolution. The low hum of the shuttle's engines finally gave way to a soft thud as it settled onto the dusty, gray regolith of the uninhabited moon. Jackson killed the power and the ship went silent, its air recycled, its warmth a fragile bubble against the infinite cold of space. He turned to Lila, who was staring out the viewport at the desolate landscape. Her face was pale, but the terror was gone, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. "We're here," he said softly. The shuttle's ramp hissed open, revealing a familiar figure silhouetted against the stark, black sky. Elias stood next to a man Jackson had only seen in pictures, the former OmniCorp executive, now just a worried father. He was pacing nervously, his hands clasped behind his back. The moment he saw his daughter, his composure shattered. Lila scrambled out of her seat and ran down the ramp, her arms open. Her father rushed to meet her, pulling her into a tight, desperate embrace. He buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jackson stayed by the shuttle, giving them their moment. Elias walked over, a small smile on his face. "You did it," he said. "It wasn't a simple smash and grab," Jackson replied, his voice a low growl. "These guys. They're not pirates. They're a new player. A syndicate. They have connections, influence, and they're going after the old guard. They're trying to fill the void left by OmniCorp." Elias's smile faded. "We have to talk." They retreated to the small, prefabricated shelter Elias had set up. Inside, the executive, whose name was David, held a cup of rehydrated coffee, his arms still wrapped around his daughter. Once Lila was settled and given some space, he sat across from Jackson, his gaze intense. "Jackson," David began, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my daughter, you saved me. I have been so blind. I had no idea what was happening." Jackson cut him off. "Your company was at the heart of it. They were using a clandestine fringe government agency, the Shadow Syndicate, to seize power. They knew what you were building, and when I took down the company, they saw an opportunity. They want to be the new OmniCorp. They're a new kind of threat." David's face crumpled in a mix of shame and horror. "I had no idea. I thought it was just business. I left OmniCorp because of what you exposed, but I didn't see this. I was so focused on building my own empire, I didn't see that I was playing into their hands." "So what now?" Elias asked, his gaze shifting between Jackson and David. "The syndicate is a snake with no head," Jackson said. "For now. I took out their comms and their schematics. They'll be disorganized, but they'll be back. They'll be hunting us now." David stared at the floor, a single tear running down his cheek. He looked up, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "I can help. I have resources, contacts, and knowledge of how these corporations operate. They destroyed my credibility, but I have a network they don't know about. I can find their weaknesses, I can give you the tools to fight them." Jackson looked at Elias. The two men exchanged a silent, knowing glance. This was a war, and they were the only ones who saw it coming. The money was a distant thought now, a quaint notion from a simpler time. "He's right," Elias said. "We can't just walk away. Not after what we know." Jackson nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Good. Because I'm in." David offered his hand, and Jackson took it. It was a new partnership, forged in the ashes of a fallen corporation and a desperate rescue mission. They had saved Lila, but the fight had just begun. The Shadow Syndicate would not rest, and neither would they. The game was on.